Okay, welcome back. We're talking about how to make radio buttons actually work independently. Because the whole point of a radio button is you pick one and therefore all the rest of the options are removed. To do this, I need a thing called a toggle group. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing. This is not a visual control. A lot of the controls we put in here, like our containers and stuff, well, toggle group isn't one of those. So I'm just going to say toggle group, and I'm just going to call him, I don't know, TG1. Is it going to know toggle group? And of course, I need to go in here and come on, get this guy working. So now what I need to do is I need to tell the toggle group who's in the group. That kind of makes sense. So I have to say TG1 dot, and then you think there's something called set toggle. Well, okay, let's do the other way around. RB1 set toggle group, and then TG1. Okay, I'm just going to copy and paste because I'm lazy. What I'm doing is that I'm putting all these radio buttons into a single toggle group. Now, one more time, this toggle group is not a visual control, so nothing shows up on the screen. Okay? All right. So let me just fix up a little bit of indentation because that's just the way I am. That's close enough. Okay, so when I run this now, it's gonna be a little bit more well behaved. It's gonna behave so when if I select one, it'll unselect the others, which of course is what radio buttons do for a living. So let's check, see if it worked. And I go, yep, yeah, it worked. But wait. One more time. I'm just gonna launch the application without making any changes to it whatsoever. If these things are supposed to be mutually exclusive, well, what about right this very second? Right this very second, nothing is selected. Well, that's not the way radio buttons are designed to work. Radio buttons are designed to work where there's one and only one choice. There can never be two choices, three choices, or four, and there should be never a situation where there is no choices picked. Okay, this is one of those sanity checking things. This is one of those things where you're trying to see if the beginning state is correct, and this is not correct. Right off the bat, I probably need to do something in order for this secondary input validation thing to go away, because I don't ever want to have a scenario where I start my application and it starts up with an impossible state. Because typically what I would do in my application, I would go through and check to see, oh, have you selected first? No. Have you selected second? No. Have you selected third? No. Have you selected fourth? No. Then I'm going to be confused because you have to select something. So this is an error right off the bat. So what you basically have to do is you have to go in and tell one of these guys that it is selected. Now, it doesn't matter which one, but I'm going to pick the first one just because it kind of makes sense. All right, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to do on RB1, then I'm going to say set selected true. Now what this is going to do, this is going to force the first one to automatically be selected. This is a very common problem in design, in user interface design, is that people are expecting something to be selected and it's not. And we're going to run across this in a couple more scenarios, so please pay attention to what I'm actually trying to tell you. Okay, I'll say it one more time. It's considered a state violation. That's hard to say. A state violation if you don't actually have one picked. Now they actually talk about this barely on page 840, but I'm not going to jump ahead. Okay, all right. So how do you find out which one of these guys has actually been selected? So in my application, like maybe I have a button click or something, how do I find out which one is selected? Okay, so in order to test out my radio buttons, I need to have something, an event handler of some sort. So I'm just going to create me a button here. So I'm going to do button bn1 is equal to new button, and it's going to say something silly like click me. Okay, and of course I need to add some more imports to make this thing work. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and add this guy in, bn1. Cool. All right, so I need to create me an event handler. Now there's two ways you can do this. I'm going to use the anonymous class version of this. Okay, so bn1, then I want to tell it that I want to set the on action guy. Okay, and then this I'm going to say I want a new event handler of type action event bowlegs. And this, for some reason, if you put the cursor right there, the first time you hit the return, it goes, I don't know what you mean. But if you go back a second time and say, no, I really want to put a return there, well, then it'll do its thing. It's kind of weird. I don't understand it. Anyway, so I'm going to add for the action event, and I'm going to add for the event handler. And then, of course, it's going to complain because I need to override something called handle. Remember that? So I'm going to do an @override, and then public void handle. And it's going to be of type action event. E. Okay, so I've written me an event handler. So all I really want to know is which one of the dang radio buttons are selected. So basically, you kind of have to brute force it. You have to basically say if, RB1 is selected, trying to get it so, and then you say, do something on the screen, like go to my label and change the text or something, I don't know. Set text to hooray. Okay, something like that. All right, so I just want to, that's how it's done with is selected. And you'd have to have a bunch of these. If RB1 is selected, if RB2 is selected, right? Okay. So let's just start this guy up. Okay, so I pick the second one. I hit click me and nothing changes. If I click the first one and hit click me, and then ta-da, it changes to hooray. Okay, cool. So I've created an event handler and I've read off the stuff that's inside the radio buttons. Okay, that's kind of sort of simple. Next one on page 848 is called the checkbox control. Now, checkbox control and radio button control are essentially the same. They practically are identical. The only difference is the checkbox controls are not designed to be mutually exclusive. So it's perfectly okay to have none of them selected or all of them selected. It is not an error like we talked about before with the grouping those radio buttons together. This guy, it's not at all a problem. So let me just throw one in just for the heck of it. Checkbox CB1 is equal to new. Checkbox, I don't know, graduate. Whatever, doesn't matter. That's not really the point. Yeah, I'm gonna put a whatever out there. And of course, I'm missing an import. What a surprise. And I need to add this guy in. CB1. So he looks slightly different. Instead of having the rounded thing, he's a squared off thing. But other than that, they work essentially the same. The same thing with, so he's square, right? And these guys are round. That's about the only real difference. Now these guys, of course, if I have a bunch of them, they're independent. So I don't need one of those toggle group guys because they're completely independent, and I could have, so there's no issue with state validation, right? Same old, same old. If I want to check to see if it's selected, I just do is selected. They're practically identical. Once you've learned one, you've actually learned the other. Let's move on. The next one is a list view control. So this is one of those things that allows you to pick a list of things. Like, I don't know, you had a bunch of things and you're trying to order a hamburger online, and so do you want tomato? Do you want cheese? Do you want, mustard? Right? Just a list of things. So you can pick multiple things off the list. Okay. So on page 858 is the list view. So we're going to build one. Okie dokie. So when you build a list view, you basically have to tell it what the data type is that you're up to. Okay, so I'm going to say list view, and then I'm going to tell it that I'm dealing with strings, because that just kind of makes sense. Most of the time it's going to be strings, wouldn't you think? And so we're going to call this one LV, I don't know, burger is equal to new list view. And of course I need to add, come on, there you go. And before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and throw my list view in here. LV burger. Okay, so now I need to add some items. But you remember we talked about this thing called an observable list? Remember that? And one of the things it did is it allowed me to add a bunch of items at once. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use this little trick that we learned from the... So I'm going to get the items. And then after I've gotten the list of items, I'm going to do an add all. And I'm going to put, I don't know. Cheese. Whatever. Pickles, etc., etc., etc. Mustard. Okay, that's enough. Okay, so what this has done is this has just made it easier. I don't have to go through and do an add and add and add because I'm using the principles of this thing. All right, so let's go see what the default one of the thing looks like if I just have three things in it, regardless of how cheese is spelled. Okay, so now it's this little striped list, and I can click one of these guys, right? I can hold the control key down and maybe pick more than one. Oh, how come I can't do that? Well, because out of the box, it's not in the multi-select mode. There's a thing you can do. There's a selection mode. There's one called single, one called multiple. Okay, and this one is kind of strange. If you intended these things to be mutually exclusive, if you did, okay. Now that's an if because I'm not saying that's the case. It is the case in radio buttons because they're clearly intended that way. But if you chose to make these mutually exclusive, then what you have to do is you have to go in and tell it, I want to select like the first one or the second one, or select. It's more difficult because you would have to actually go find the index of where mustard is and then tell it that that's the one that I want. So it just kind of makes sense to put, if you were to go that way, to put the one you want selected at the top. I'm just saying. Okay, so I'm going to pretend like that's what we're doing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the get, so here we go. I'm going to do LV burger, get selection mode, selection model, not selection mode, sorry. And then I'm going to say select first. Okay, and that'll just make it so that when you run this thing, that's the first one that's selected. Okay, and again, I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying if you had a list view and you wanted to make it mutually exclusive, or one of those scenarios where something is picked by default, well then that one is picked by default. Okay, that's it. That's basically all you need to know. Okay, so if you want to find out what like in my box, I want to do an event handler and say, hey, which one is selected? Well, you do get select model, and then say get selected item, which will tell you that the value of the string, or get selected index, which will tell you the number. In this case, the index would be 0, right, for the first one? Okay, is this making sense? So responding to events, it's not all that complex. So let's just go ahead and continue, and it's time for the 15-minute mark.